What we see here is Donald Trump acting, as he always does, as a global chaos generator.
Why are we being dragged into a war where there is no clear understanding of the long-term outcome?
Well, I must say, last week on Question Time, I didn't anticipate we'd be talking about a war this week, but here we are. A war where there's no clear understanding of the long-term outcome. Stephen?
Well, the Prime Minister set out two distinct decisions that he's made. The first was not to take part in the initial strikes by the US and Israel on Iran. But when it comes to our allies, our personnel, British interests being threatened, that he will allow permissions for defence of those assets and people. That is exactly the right decision to take. And I think in a situation like this, you need that consistent, thoughtful, credible leadership. This is clearly an extremely worrying situation, not least for the nearly 300,000 Brits. I'm sure there are people in the audience who have family members and friends who've potentially been stuck or affected by this. Our first priority is their safety and security, getting them out. It's supporting our armed forces personnel, including some who've been in action in the skies, defending our allies, our bases and our interests. And of course, it's ensuring that we find a negotiated way forward, that we reduce the instability and de-escalate the situation. That's exactly what the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, myself and others have been focused on in recent days.
James?
Well, the truth is that there is no war that's entered into where the outcome is certain. That's a desirable but undeliverable aim. But we've got to remember that Iran has been tiptoeing towards acquiring a nuclear weapon for some time. It's tried to do it slowly in the hope that no one day is so much worse than the day before that it will trigger a response. When I was Foreign Secretary, I said on a number of occasions, Israel is not going to allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. And if we don't want Israel to take a kinetic action, as they have done, then we need to force Iran to abandon its nuclear aspirations. That was not successful. And sadly, the actions that we've seen this week, I thought were largely inevitable. Stephen said that the decision was made not to initially take part in those strikes. But it was more than that. The Prime Minister blocked the US from using its own equipment from British air bases. I think that was an error. I think it's damaged our reputation with the United States of America, not just with President Trump, but with their wider diplomatic and military circles.
I mean, when you've got, James, when you've got people like former NATO Commander General Sir Richard Shirreff and other military leaders have said that they thought Starmer reacted with a cool head and it was the right thing to do.
Well, opinions will vary, and there are other senior military and retired military leaders who I've spoken to who have said that they think that he has appeared slow and indecisive, and it has damaged our reputation and relationship, not just with the United States of America, but with countries in the Middle East. And the reason I said a day late and a dollar short is he is now doing the right kind of things, but he's doing them later than he should have done. And that's got the worst of both worlds, in that we are now heavily involved. I think that was always going to happen anyway. But because he's been on the back foot, he has burnt through a relationship, and we have lost our seat at the top table of global influence because he has been slow off the mark.
And can I just check with you, Stephen, because I've just heard that John Healey, the Defence Secretary, says that HMS Dragon, the ship that's at Portsmouth, we were told only yesterday it was going to get to Cyprus by next week. It's now going to be 2 weeks. How can this be taking so long?
So I think the first thing to say, and I would challenge James on, is that the
Well, what about that? Why is it taking 2 weeks?
The Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary and all of our armed forces put in place a series of measures many months before this current situation in response to the rising threat in the region. We had F-35s in the region, we had radar equipment, we had anti-drone measures, we had air defence measures.
You've got a ship stuck in Portsmouth that's not going to get there. You've got France, you've got other countries sending their ships to Cyprus. They're going to get there before us.
And we also have pilots in the air, literally last night, who've been shooting down drones and missiles threatening our allies. So I think we need to be very careful
ship taking
focusing
so
on any
long?
individual piece of equipment. Defending our bases, defending our allies, and ensuring that we're able to defend Britain's interests is many different aspects. We have put many of those in place, and it's simply not correct to say we've been late to the table.
But what about, why is this ship taking 2 weeks?
Well, as I said, I'm not going to get into any individual operational decision. I think if we went into the individual facts about an individual ship...
There's a lot of head shaking going on in the audience here. Is it
defending
you don't know? You're not Defence Secretary, I could understand that.
I'm not the Defence Secretary, but defending our base and defending our people takes many different aspects. I've been in contact with our friends in Cyprus in the last few days. We have obviously had a range of measures in place there. The Prime Minister's announced the additional jets going out to Qatar. And as I said, we have RAF pilots and equipment in the air right now defending our interests and our allies.
Woman in the stripy top.
Yeah, last year, Trump did a strike in Israel, Iran, on the nuclear capability and declared it the most successful strike in the world ever. If that was so successful, it feels like he's waited for Netanyahu to cajole him long enough to then launch this strike. There was no evidence, as far as I'm aware, listening to various podcasts and people talking, that there was any sort of nuclear imminently. It feels like actually Trump just wants to go do a war. And why is Putin being let off the hook in Russia, doing exactly what he wants with Ukraine? It's just disgusting, really, that this is allowed to happen. And I agree, it feels actually to me like we actually have an adult in charge at the moment who is calm and thoughtful. Whether he makes the right decisions all the time, I'm not saying he does. However, it does feel like we have an adult in the room for once.
Shashank, you're saying that you don't... I mean, President Trump said it had been obliterated, effectively, the nuclear threat. And is there, in fact, an imminent threat? Is that what we should be responding to?
There is no imminent threat. There's no imminent threat. I heard President Trump say yesterday Iran was 2 weeks away from a nuclear bomb, and that's simply untrue. It's wrong. It's false. James is right that Iran has had nuclear weapons aspirations, and he's right they've gone down that path, and that's got to be recognised here. Iran has lied about that. But fundamentally, Iran's nuclear program was no more materially advanced in a serious way 2 weeks ago than it was at the end of that 12-day war last year. And that is one of the reasons, in my view, this war was unnecessary and unwise. Ever-shifting war aims by Trump, who is saying he disclaims the idea of regime change, but in fact is arming a Kurdish force that is encouraged to attack inside Iran. And when you put that together, I can understand why no European leader could responsibly join in on a campaign like that on day one. But even if you think that this war is legal, or even if you think it has upsides, my biggest concern is the opportunity cost, because you mentioned Ukraine, you mentioned Russia, and I'm glad you did, because America is spending $1 billion per day on this campaign, in munitions, in operating costs. It is burning, along with Gulf states and others, through years' worth of air defence interceptors in days. And those are weapons you need for defending Kiev and indeed for defending countries like Taiwan. And that's why I'm gravely concerned that this war, while I'm delighted to see the death of a dictator who's killed tens of thousands of his own people, and I'm glad to see Iranian missiles shot out of the sky, and I don't think that's being dragged in. I think that's the right course of action. This didn't need to happen, and it has a big opportunity cost for our other responsibilities around the world.
OK, let's hear some more from our audience. Lots of hands up. Yes, the man there in the blue shirt and the jacket.
You say that we've reacted slowly, which I think we have, but Trump has been amassing his military might in the Persian Gulf and that area for many weeks. Ships are slow. So why are we not putting our battleships in the Mediterranean way before now?
Right, why did we take so long?
Yeah.
Woman here.
Paraphrasing, but isn't it any fool can start a war, and once they've done so, it takes a wise man. And
a wise man can't end it, or it takes a wise man to end it, something like that.
You've got it better than myself. It feels very much that listening to all the different people speaking, especially the rhetoric coming out of the States, you sometimes wonder just how much in touch they are with reality and the extent to which they are really concerned about all sides and the devastation it's going to cause to ordinary people. It just feels as if he's thinking it's expendable. Don't get me wrong, I don't really approve of the Iranian leadership. I think there were tensions there, but it just felt as if all of a sudden he just dived in without really thinking it through. And I still am not sure why and what his exit strategy is. And that's frightening, I think, for all of us.
Woman here.
Hello. HMS Dragon is at Portsmouth. So how many ships have we got in the Royal Navy fleet? Can't we send another ship, re-divert it somewhere? It's bad if we're only relying on one ship, isn't it?
Well, I presume we're not relying on one ship, are we? Or?
No, I mean, we have a range of capabilities in the Royal Navy, but what I would just take you back to is what I said about the different capabilities that you use to respond to the threat.
Okay.
F-35s, the Typhoons that the Prime Minister announced today, air defence measures, anti-drone measures,
but
all
are
of
other
those together.
ships that we have in the fleet, surely they have this equipment on board?
So you're asking why hasn't one of them been
yes,
sent to get there more quickly?
Well, again, I'm not going to get into the operational decision around one vessel. This is a whole series of measures
All right,
that are in place to defend our bases and our allies.
Annabel.
So the two words that have stood out to me from the discussion thus far are first consistent, and the insistence that the government's position has been consistent here. It hasn't. For a start, last April, Keir Starmer pledged to continue protecting Israel against Iranian aggression. And yet we're now a country that makes that sort of commitment and yet refuses to follow through on those assurances when our allies ask us for their support. And we are now at risk of looking unreliable, almost as though we're a bad faith actor. And that brings me to the second word that stood out, which is reputation, and this idea that we ought to have a seat at the top table. We don't anymore, and the reason for that is that for the last 2 decades, our defence policy has been a complete scandal in which both main parties have been complicit. We have allowed our armed forces to be completely hollowed out. We've refused to invest in them, despite the fact that politicians keep talking about how the peace dividend is over, how after Putin sent his tanks into Ukraine and launched that illegal war, we needed that investment in our defence capabilities. Some were even talking about 1930s rearmament. And indeed, Keir Starmer today was talking about how we must go further and faster on defence spending. And yet it's never set out how on earth we are going to reach 2.5%, 3%, 3.5%. Keir Starmer said that by 2035 we would be spending 5% of GDP on defence. And at the moment, we're struggling to spend half that. And the reason for that is that our profligate politicians have this almost compulsive desire to spend money on other things, namely welfare, at the expense of investing in our armed forces. And they're often doing it with the best of intentions. But we're really starting to feel the effects of this. And the sense that I think the British public now has is of governments that have no plan, that are unable to prioritise our national security, and that there's a lack of appetite to hold on to those freedoms that 80 years ago were so hard fought for.
George?
Well, the question asked whether we're being dragged into a war with no clear outcomes. We're also being dragged into a war with no clear objectives. We've seen Trump say, it's regime change. Oh, no, it's not regime change. It's because of the nuclear weapons. Oh, I wiped those out in June. There are no nuclear weapons. Oh, it's because of an imminent threat. No evidence whatsoever of an imminent threat. The real reason for this attack is spectacle. That's what Trump trades in. That's what he loves. He wants to be the centre of attention. He wants to be making global headlines. That's his happy place. Now, for us to get dragged into that is not only criminal, it's foolish in the utmost degree. This war has no basis in international law whatsoever. There are two valid reasons why you can go to war. One is self-defence, and the other is if you've got a United Nations Security Council resolution. This has neither. James Cleverly has learnt nothing from Iraq, has learnt nothing from Afghanistan, has learnt nothing from Libya. What we see here is Donald Trump acting, as he always does, as a global chaos generator. And the further we stand away from that, the better off we will be.
George,
let me just ask you, because it's clear this was clearly something you don't agree with. Now, you are a Green activist. You are not... you're Green with a small g, that's how you describe yourself. But you have described the Greens as a plausible alternative to Labour. But do you support the Green Party policy, leaving NATO, seeing the UK give up nuclear weapons? Is that something you support?
I don't support leaving NATO, actually. I think NATO's very important, and I think that Ukraine would greatly benefit from being part of NATO. I think that NATO membership is what keeps Poland and the Baltic states from being attacked so far by Russia. I would very strongly support Shashank's points about all this expenditure, all these munitions which Ukraine could have been using, being diverted elsewhere instead. In fact, Zelensky has said that the US has already burnt through more PAC Patriot missiles in attacking Iran than have been made available to Ukraine in the entire course of that war. And so, you know, it's a massive opportunity cost, a massive wasted opportunity. It's also simply an illegal, illegitimate war in which we should play no part.
Man there with the glasses.
It very much feels like the press in general seems, especially the right-wing press, is out of touch with the general public on this issue, especially papers like The Telegraph being very much war hawks. Yet if you look at the polling, the majority of the British public does not want us to go to war in Iran. And furthermore, we are presented as an outlier. Oh, Britain, look at Keir Starmer, look at him being weak. One of our biggest allies, Spain, they're refusing to take part, and Trump's threatened to embargo them. So are we less, you know, not going to war, and are we more standing up to a bully?
OK. Woman here in the front.
I'm just concerned about the thousands of people in Iran who are being blown up by bombs and horrible weaponry. I saw a funeral of schoolgirls on the television. It was horrible. And I'm just very concerned about Trump is saying he was doing it because he wants regime change. When we were bombed in the Blitz, did it make us more determined against our enemies, or did it mean we gave in? That's what I think. It's just, I don't think it's going to achieve anything. It's just going to mean people are going to die.
OK. Man at the back there, in the middle.
The hypocrisy of people that are saying that Putin's war is illegal and then trying to usher through Trump's illegal war as if we should be a lapdog to the United States is quite breathtaking.
Let me just... I mean, it's not scientific, but I'm just interested, given what I'm hearing from you, can I have a show of hands? How many of you think this is a war that Britain should be involved in? Not many. A handful, I would say. Shashank, as someone who's spent more time studying Iran than probably all of us on the panel put together, where can you see this going in terms of either regime change or quite what could happen in Iran?
So I think what we're seeing is that the entire leadership has been obliterated and it's in complete tumult. You saw Trump say we identified potential successors to lead the regime, but then we killed all of them. And that's one of the reasons I'm concerned about the lack of thinking and planning about what happens next. There is a world, I think, in which the change to this regime is positive and good and something sensible emerges out of this, a more democratic Iran. But right now, when I look at what's happening, the successor to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commander, who was killed 4 days ago, is a man, General Vahidi, who was associated with the bombing of a Jewish cultural site in Argentina in the 1990s. How is that progress? And my great concern is, whilst there is a chance something positive emerges and that we see a more democratic Iran, and I'm sure many of us would absolutely welcome that after 40 years of tyranny, the problem is you can also see a future in which you see the dissolution of the Iranian state, the fragmentation of Iran, and the country moving in the direction of Syria. And, for example, when you are encouraging Kurdish militias to attack Iran and encouraging ethnic minorities on the edges of Iran, the Baluch, the Azeris, to rise up, I'm gravely concerned you could see the disintegration of that country. And of course, the second order effect would be cataclysmic in terms of refugee flows, loose nuclear materials that Iran has buried under rubble, loose missiles. I think it would be a source of enormous concern. And so if you embark on a war like this, however good your intentions may be to seek a better Iran, you must have a plan and a sense of who is going to run this country in the weeks and months ahead.
James, I was very struck by something that your leader said in the House of Commons yesterday, where she said Britain should be shooting the archer, not the arrows. So the arrows are coming from Iran in the form of missiles. The archer, therefore, is Iran. Well, that's the case, isn't it? Presumably that sounds like what Kemi Badenoch is suggesting, is we should be attacking Iran.
Well, so the point that she was making is about the interception of incoming munitions. The point is that the military strikes into Iran are designed to neutralise their launch capability rather than air defence. And
But if she thinks we should stop the archer, what does that mean in practical terms for the UK armed forces?
That means striking at the launch capabilities of the missiles rather than missile intercepting.
Right, so we should be, what, with jets flying over Iran and bombing where the missiles are setting off from?
So the point...
I think that's what you're saying, is it?
So the point...
Is that what you're saying?
The point she was making is that... I mean, I will finish the first sentence, then I'll go to your second, third and fourth
Well, it's not. That's the question I'm asking, is literally
that's not the first question you're asking.
It is. I'm saying, what does that mean?
I'm still answering
what
the
does
first question.
stop the archer mean? Does it mean...
I'm trying to explain.
Well, by all means do.
So the point that Kemi was saying is that, as we've already heard, intercepting missiles is a very expensive way of dealing with a threat and is burning through Patriot systems and other systems that could be better used elsewhere. Striking the launch capability, whether we do it or allies do it, the US do it, a combination of the above do it, is a secondary point. The primary point is preventing the initial launch, and the launch capability is a much more effective way than what the UK is currently doing, which is using a very, very expensive capability, both in terms of fast jets and ground-to-air air defence systems. So preventing the launch is what we should be doing. And
OK, so hang on. So you still haven't answered my question. So I think what... Has he?
No.
What I'm asking you specifically is when Kemi Badenoch said we need to stop the archer, i.e. where the missiles are being launched from in Iran, what do you imagine we are going to do that? Does that mean we'll be sending British jets over Iran and dropping bombs?
Well, there's been no request for that capability, and I don't know whether that is how we would best add to the collective defence of ourselves and our allies. I've been at COBRA meetings where there have been requests for a division of labour.
Okay. But it sounds like that's what she thinks we should be doing. No, that's what she said.
When she said she was talking not just about the UK, but the alliance of our friends and allies. She's always talked in those terms. Okay. But the point she was saying, and this is where I think Steve and I have a legitimate, and it's not even a political disagreement, but where Keir Starmer is saying, oh, we've got planes in the air intercepting drones, intercepting missiles, that's all well and good. But it's an incredibly expensive way of using very sophisticated, very expensive capabilities, taking out very cheap weapon systems. And if you keep doing that over and over again, you'll burn through your defences.
Do you want to answer?
And you're better off neutralising the launch sites.
Look, I'm somewhat surprised. I mean, I have a lot of respect for James, and he did a very good job as Foreign Secretary and a Minister, and we've got on very well in the past. I am surprised and disappointed by the approach that Kemi Badenoch's taken in this. I think we've got hundreds of thousands of Brits stranded and worried sick in the Middle East. We've got our armed forces in the air putting their lives on the line. We've got our armed forces in bases at risk. And I think this is, if I look at what we did in opposition, which coming behind the government on things like Ukraine and other issues, we need to see some unity. We need to see some coming together at a crucial time for British interests. I wanted to challenge the point, really, that was made about the top table. Keir Starmer has shown exactly what it is to be at the top table, and his leadership of the coalition of the willing, his leadership on Ukraine, his calm and measured approach to issues. I was just chairing the United Nations Security Council last week on the issue of Ukraine. The lady at the back was raising and standing up for Ukraine, challenging Russian lies in the Security Council. We are very much at the top table in the United Nations, in our armed forces, in our intelligence, in our diplomats. I'm incredibly proud of what our diplomats are doing right now in the Middle East, but across the world, and what our armed forces are doing. And I don't want to see Britain being talked down as we're seeing. And on defence spending...
Well, I mean, obviously Donald Trump is talking Britain down in big style. Yeah. I mean, talking about Keir Starmer, this is no Winston Churchill, talking about ruining the relationship. I mean, that's where the talking down's coming from.
Well, look, there is obviously a difference on this issue.
That's an understatement.
But what I will say is that it is for the Prime Minister to put Britain's interests first, according to our laws, our interests, the defence of our personnel, of our citizens across the Middle East and indeed globally, and that's exactly what he's been doing, and that's the basis he'll take the decisions that he has done.
Except that based on reporting today, Keir Starmer isn't putting the national interest first, he's not putting the country first, he's putting himself and the Labour Party first, which is why we've had these reports that his position changed from Friday to Sunday in terms of allowing access to our bases, to America and to Israel, and there was a quartet of cabinet ministers who blocked him from doing so. And following the defeat in Gorton and Denton, that by-election last week, in which Labour came third, I think there is a very serious concern that Keir Starmer is putting the demands of backbenchers, of cabinet ministers, ahead of what he himself believes to be in the best interest of this country, because he thinks that it's to his electoral advantage to do so.
Not the case.
Man there in the dark jacket, yes.
Point that Shashank made. Do you think the Israeli government would be very happy with the outcome of a chaotic Iran with no real government?
Shashank?
I think that I acknowledge, first of all, that Israel has lived under the shadow of these missiles for a long time. And it's had to equip itself with missile defences of ballistic missiles raining down on its own cities indiscriminately in very difficult ways, and living under the shadow of a regime that's also sponsored armed radical groups on its periphery in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Iraq, including those that have killed British troops as well. So I'm not in any way going to diminish Israel's security concerns when it looks out at the regime it's faced for the last 30 years. Having said that, I have seen the way Israel has approached the new regime in Syria, where I think that they have created buffer zones, they have bombed it. I'm not sure they've dealt with it in the most constructive way. And I'm also, yes, concerned that Israel's interest in what they wish to see in Iran in the long run may not be what the interests of the United States or the Gulf Arab states or Europeans are. And although Israel may be happier with an Iran that is fragmented, that is unable to work on a nuclear program, that is more divided, I think that civil war or complete fragmentation in Iran, that is not a good outcome for us.
Okay. Man there in the green jacket, yeah.
Yeah, Tony Blair was vilified for blindly backing America in a phony war. So why is Keir Starmer being criticised for refusing to do the same?
George?
Well, this is a very important point, and I'm very glad that Keir Starmer is refusing. Trump says he's no Winston Churchill. Well, in this respect, I'm very happy that he's no Winston Churchill, because Winston Churchill did intervene in Iran, and we are living with the consequences of that today. So Churchill and his counterparts in the US launched a coup against the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, in 1953, because he was nationalising the oil industry. He said, this oil belongs to Iran, it shouldn't be all captured by the Anglo-Iranian oil company and siphoned out of our country and the wealth taken away from us. A perfectly reasonable position, but Churchill wasn't having any of that. He prompted the US, in particular the CIA, to launch a coup, overthrew Mossadegh, who was a highly popular leader. He was revered by his people to an extent that very few of ours ever are, and installed instead, reinstalled the Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, with his brutal, cruel regime. And when that regime was overthrown in the Iranian Revolution in 1979, one of the main reasons that people gave for that new revolution was the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953. So we are now living, or rather the Iranians are now living, with this brutal and horrible Ayatollah's regime, which was instituted in response to what the British and the Americans did before. This is what's called imperial blowback. And we think we're being so clever and so brilliant in wading in to countries about which our governments often seem to know very little, plunging in and firing missiles and staging coups and all the rest of it. But we don't think of those long-term outcomes, those long-term consequences, and the absolutely catastrophic effects that they can have many decades down the line.